Hello everybody, and welcome back to Solo Score Rush. We're finally getting into another match. I did start off a little bit late, so my apologies on that one. I was having just a little bit of issues with the client. And going into this match is going to be HomuAkemi versus Lina. A very interesting match coming up right here. I've seen both these players play for a decent amount of time, just whether it be in this tournament or in other tournaments, so I'm really excited to see how both of them are going to be doing. Especially in a matchup like this one, I feel like it's going to be a very heavy kind of Rice and Ellen battle in a way. Lina having just really good Ellen accuracy in general, also just have a lot of very well-rounded skill. And Homu just as well having a lot of this well-roundedness, but they do capitalize a little bit on the consistency and on the Rice just a little bit more. But we're straight off going into LN4. I think these bands are a little bit interesting. I mean, I think Rice 1 is fair. It is a very tricky pick, especially just given some of the kind of technicality that it has for a stream pick, and also just the fact that a lot of finger independence is needed. I think LN2 though is a bit of an interesting ban coming from Homu. I know that the LN accuracy at times can fall off just a little bit. Not the worst, but it definitely does fall off just a little bit. I think especially in a matchup like this one. But going into LN4, I think this is probably a really good pick coming from Lina. It helps act as a bit of an opening pick, where we really see which player has the advantage when it comes to these LN picks. As we start to get into more of these normal LN roles, I really wonder how much of an advantage both of these players are going to have on separate picks. I mean, Lina obviously holding really strong accuracy right now, but Homu has been very consistent just in general as a player when it comes to tournament picks. I've seen them play in a lot of other tournaments, and they're just able to hold on to an FC so easily. And especially in the Rice department, their accuracy is just stellar. I think the only issue for them really is just going to be when it comes to a lot of these other Ellen and hybrid picks such as this one, which isn't too complicated on its own, but just the fact that Homu doesn't have that strong of the Ellen accuracy side, it's definitely going to be a little bit of a struggle, but I do think they're going to be able to make up for it in some of these picks, and especially with just the fact that they are a very consistent player. Especially with Ellen1 not being banned, I definitely think that's another that Lina can easily use to their advantage, especially if they're able to hold such a lead like this one on a pick that's a lot more simpler in terms of holding good accuracy. I mean, these walls definitely not being the simplest walls, but there's still a lot of kind of area for them to both build up that accuracy, especially just because it isn't really too technical. There's times where you do see some of the releases end a little bit early in the 1-4 section, but for the most part they're relatively simple and intuitive to follow, which I think helps, especially with players who have a lot of that Ellen fundamentals. But as we're getting into this final course, there really isn't much that Homu can really do. I mean, they're staying as consistent as possible, and they're just really hoping that maybe Climate gets a miss, but being this late, I don't really see it being too likely, especially just given the accuracy lead that we see. I mean, obviously we might see maybe a few 200s here and there from either player, but that's gonna be most of the damage that can really be done this later on. And as we do end it here, final with a 993, very respectable score. Homu also just having a good score, but just not being able to keep up with the accuracy from Lina. But it immediately goes straight into Rice 2, which I think is a good pick. I mean, we saw how Rice 1 was banned. And one thing too is that Homu is so good when it comes to a lot of these like speed speedy raw skill picks. I mean, I've seen a lot of the like more difficult speed scores in other tournaments, and it is scary. So I'd imagine that they're able to stay very, very consistent on a pick like this one, which isn't as fast. It's definitely not the dentist pick either, and it's definitely something that Homu has a lot of breathing room, I would say, especially just because they're probably very comfortable on a pick like this one. I think the main thing that Plina just has to do is make sure that they might be able to hold on to the accuracy maybe a little bit more, or just stay consistent overall. I mean, as I said earlier, Plina's a very, very well-rounded player, not just in terms of just being able to play all these skill sets, but also just having really good accuracy in all of these skills as well. I mean, especially on a pick like this one that's a little bit more raw skill heavy and can be a little bit tricky as well, just due to how chilly this can be at times. It's definitely going to be such an important aspect when it comes to both of these players. But as we do kind of continue on through this pick, we start to see the accuracy slower just a little bit for both these players. Plina taking just a little bit more damage, probably struggling a lot more with these trills compared to Homu, which I would expect Homu to be fine with these trills given how good of a speed player they are. It's really just making sure that Homu stays consistent, and Plina's just going to have to stay equally as consistent, but not going to be able to take that accuracy advantage, which won't matter too much if they're able to just capitalize easily off of the L1s. I mean, we saw how that last L1 went, and it's very easy for Plina to be able to hold a little bit of cushioning just because of how big that score lead was on the L1. As we continue through, stamina becoming a little bit more of an aspect in this pick. Plina dropping ever so slightly below that 0.7 range, most likely just because of how kind of techy this can be at times, which I can't really blame them. In terms of jump streams, this is a little bit techier, especially with a lot of these anchors and these one-handed trills that do come into motion. But there is a little bit of breakroom here. Either player could maybe potentially check up on the other opponent's accuracy, but I wouldn't put too much pressure on Plina just given the last L1 pick. They just have to make sure to stay as consistent as possible. I think consistency is just going to be a major part in holding that slight lead that Plina has. I think Homu is definitely not going to have much trouble when it comes to that consistency aspect. It's really just being able to hold the accuracy. As we do get into this kind of quote-unquote break session, things are going to slowly work back up just a little bit. And I think if we are going to see any misses potentially, it's probably going to be at this section. But we'll kind of see how these players are in terms of consistency. So a lot of these two-handed trills going back and forth, and into this ending we see a little bit more of those 3-note anchors and those trills overall. But that lead starting to close in just a little bit, at least on the side of Homu. Definitely not going to nullify that lead that we saw, but it's definitely going to help them just a lot more. And we start to see the opposite of what we saw with LN4. I mean, we saw Plina was like 300 perfects and Homu was like 700, but now it's the other way around. Really just make you wonder how this match will go overall. Especially just given that there aren't as many L1s as the Rice picks, and especially given that one of the L1s is already banned. So Plina might only just have one L1 left to pick if Homu decides to ban one of the other L1s. But we'll kind of see how this shakes out. It is Homu's pick again, so they definitely have a little bit of room to get just a little bit of a score lead, especially with whatever pick they choose. I think potentially, if we want to go for something a little bit more on that raw skill heavy, like we saw with Rice 2, maybe Rice 4 might be a good choice. You could also see Rice 5, I think. I think either of those picks will do just fine, especially just given how, I guess, a little bit more tricky those picks are. I don't really know if something like Rice 4 would be a good pick, just given that it's not really too physical and it's very, very straightforward. Knight 6 could also work, just given the consistency. Yeah, Rice 4. I kind of expected this one to be quick, just given that it's very tricky. And it kind of relies a little bit on being able to play a lot of these kind of fast transitions. But here we go, into Rice for our technical abrasive pick. Seems that both these players are sight reading, which could be a little bit dangerous given that this is a technical file. I mean, with these tech picks, there's a lot of kind of tricks up its sleeves, and if you're sight reading, it could be very easy to mess up, especially just because of how fast some of these bursts are, and especially with some of the jacks that come into play on a pick like this one. But we're starting off into a little bit of more tamer session. Nothing really too much, but we're slowly going to ramp things up just a lot more. Might have having a bit of a dirty transition into this first section. I think it was on one of those first, most likely. It's not the worst thing to happen. I mean, given that it is a Rice pick on Homu's side, Plina doesn't really have to worry too much, at least. I mean, sure, that lead might grow a little bit on the side of Homu, but as soon as this pick is over, it is Plina's pick, but that is just being very, very dirty. And like I was saying earlier, sight reading a pick like this one, she's going to be so dangerous. We see that lead just be around the 2k, go all the way to 20k. I mean, you see a lot of these tricky patterns, like some of these like long jacks, and especially when it's like two of them at the same time, and even some of these trills and bursts, it's so easy to mess up on them if you aren't expecting them. And I think this pick is the prime example of what to not sight read at all. But as we are getting into this next section, I do worry a little bit just because of like some of these like trickier transitions, especially with the Peace Grace notes. I mean, you see it catch Plina off guard just a little bit more. I mean, there really isn't much that Plina can do, especially against someone who's so consistent like Homu. It's just gonna be kind of an uphill battle from here on out, especially given that it might be Plina's pick next, but after that comes the second ban phase, which can just be very worrying. But as we're getting into this ending, Homu's just gonna build up as much as a lead as they can. And I guess the one good thing is that even despite this big lead, there's still just a little bit of that score that's still not going to be taken into that lead, just given that little early lead that Plina did have. Yeah, that's definitely being very, very scary inside Plina. But it is their pick, so we'll kind of have to see what they go with, and especially given that Homu isn't the best Ellen player in this match, there's definitely a lot of room for Plina to potentially get a little bit of that lead back. I think either Ellen would be just fine. I mean, Ellen 1 being very coordination friendly, of course, but Ellen 3 also having a little bit of that aspect. I mean, especially with that lead that we saw on Ellen 4, I feel like maybe something like Ellen 3 might be just a little bit better. It's like a basic Ellen 1. I think either is a fine choice, especially just given the kind of difficult aspect of getting good accuracy on a pick like this one, especially with Homu being a little bit on the weaker side, especially with what we saw on Ellen 4. I wonder if we'll see a bigger lead from here, or if Homu might be able to play something like this just a little bit better. The one thing with Ellen 4 though, I guess that might be a little bit more challenging for some players, might just be the fact that Ellen walls aren't really too common. So potentially that might be one of the reasons that we saw Homu struggle just a little bit. But here we go. As we do get into RIP gossips, I'm very interested to see how both of them will perform, especially on a pick like this one. But we'll have to see if that score goes around the other way. It's very early on. I mean, you see that we already go into final side, and it does leave a lot of worry for these later sections, especially if they're just struggling very, very early on. I mean, you see the score lead growing a little bit just because like we haven't really seen these scores fully stabilize. And I think that's mostly what Plinish is gonna have to rely on. I mean, sure, that lead from Rice 4 is definitely huge, but if Plinish is able to keep up with the other Rice picks, then potentially they might be able to gain it back just a little bit. But it's definitely gonna be a very, very uphill battle. But as we are continuing on, Plino's starting to struggle a little bit on that accuracy side, going from that 0.7 to a very high 0.50, which does leave a little bit of concern for that lead. Only just being because, I mean, the other Rice picks left could be a little bit scary, especially just given Rice 4. Sure, they might not be as abrasive, but there's still room for Plino to maybe mess up just as much. I mean, especially on a pick like this one, Plino needs to capitalize as much as they can, given that potentially this is the last Ellen that we'll see. But you kind of have to wait and see. I mean, this lead's not really growing too much. It's more of just both these players struggling a little bit on this coordination aspect, especially just with a mid-game pick like this one. It can be very, very awkward at times, just because it isn't that fast, but at the same time it isn't that slow, so it can be a bit of an awkward range for maybe a lot of players. And especially with the kind of nature of a map like this one, where it isn't consistently the same thing. You have like a lot of these shields, and then you have a lot of these awkward releases at times. And I guess that section may be favoring Plino just a little bit more, but it's definitely not going to be the lead that Plino needed. But as we do end things, we're going to mitigate by a little bit. Not too much, but it does take away 10% of that lead, so not as much, but we've seen in other matches where we see a small lead at the start and it just snowballs into something much more, and potentially that's what we could see. But we are getting into the second ban phase. I'd imagine Plino maybe bans maybe race 5 or race 6. I don't think race 3 should be too much of a riskier one, just because it's a lot more simpler compared to race 4. I mean, we saw it in race 2, both the players were able to manage. Oh, that's interesting. I wasn't expecting race 3 to be banned, just because I feel like, especially later on, you just want to make sure that the lead doesn't grow any bigger. And I feel like on something like race 5 or race 6, I feel like those are the picks where the scroll lead can grow just a little bit more, but we'll kind of have to see. It is Homu's pick. We'll be going into race 6, which I think is probably a really good pick for him, just given that he's a very, very consistent player, and especially on a pick like this one that isn't too physical, it'll definitely help a lot, especially just given the fact that it is a little bit on the speedy side, at least in terms of like streams. And I know Homu's just really strong when it comes to a lot of these like streamier picks. But we'll see. I'm just a little bit worried to see how Plina does, especially just given how the other picks have gone from the right side. Especially if that consistency drops, just anywhere. But we'll see. I mean, I feel like these two race picks are just going to be so dangerous. But here we go into race 6, our next pick. Really too much, but Plina having a little bit of a weaker accuracy side for this beginning. I do hope that they're able to stabilize a little bit more and potentially gain a little bit more accuracy. And a very, very early drop from Plina, definitely gonna hurt, but we'll see if it's maybe a one-time thing. I doubt we'll see Homu miss, but we'll see. Anything is possible, especially on a bit of a lengthier pick. But a lot of these trills definitely going to cause a little bit of trouble, especially for Plina. I mean, we haven't even seen the bulk of this, so it is very scary, especially just given that, like, that lead from Rice 4 is just huge. A lot of these picks just being close in general, but that Rice 4 is just so dangerous. Here we go, as we do get into the streamier section. Some of these trills are going to appear, not as much, just going to be more of these streams. You see Homu drop a little bit of that accuracy, but it's not going to really matter, especially with that miss that we saw. The lead's still kind of growing just ever so slightly bit by bit, especially as we are progressing on. I mean, the miss maybe not costing as much as it might in a shorter pick, but still. So more of these trills just kind of appearing less of these streams. I do hope that we don't see any chokes on these trills from Plina, just because it did seem like they struggled a little bit when it came to like the earlier trills. And this also just being very continuous, it adds a little bit of a stamina factor. I mean, even in these break sections, you don't have like much time to rest, and potentially that being one of the causes for those misses. As we do get back into this section, we're going to see a little bit of these jacks come through, and nothing really Plina can really do at this point. Just going to have to stay as consistent as possible and hope that they're able to gain just a little bit of that accuracy back to try and mitigate that lead as much as possible, especially just because it is in the 36k lead. It's going to go into that 50k plus lead, which is going to be so dangerous, especially if Plina still wants to manage to get into the tiebreaker, which maybe we could see things change, but it's still going to be a very risky option. As we do get to this ending section, you see a lot of these trills, a lot of these jacks, as well as the strings mixing together to create just a very, very difficult section. But with that section over, there's nothing really left for these players to miss. It's just trying to get as much marvelousness as they can. And with that, the score lead's gonna grow by just a little shy under double. But it's definitely gonna be a very, very dangerous game for Plina, especially given that Homu still has one pick left at the very end. If they're able to gain just a little bit of that accuracy, that score lead in the next two picks. Especially given that we saw the other two Ellens get banned. But it looks like we'll be seeing hybrid. I don't really know if this is a good pick from Plina, just given that it is a little bit more racy compared to a lot of these other hybrids, especially hybrid 3. But maybe they choose hybrid 3 next. Not really too sure. But I feel like this pick might maybe be a little bit more in favor of Homu, just because of like these dumps that are in play. I mean, obviously we haven't seen Rise 5 yet, so maybe it's a little bit too early to say. We'll see. I mean, some of these Allens are also just equally as tricky as these Rice Bursts. But obviously the Allens aren't as prevalent as the Rice Burst. So we'll kind of see. It might just be one of those things where it's just who has the better advantage. I am a little bit worried on a pick like this one. I mean, there isn't really much that Plina can really do, like, similarly to, like, the Allens, where, like, there's gonna probably be a huge accuracy difference. On a pick like this one, I doubt the accuracy is gonna be that far apart. And especially with, like, a 61k lead, you're gonna need those far apart scores if you really want to make a comeback. I mean, especially with a pick like this one, the Allens are a little bit more awkward, so maybe we could see the lead just a little bit farther than we see right now. But it's still just very scary, especially when you have to transition into these bursts. And both these players are just doing phenomenal still, but it's only a quarter in. We still haven't really reached the aspect where a lot of these sections are just trickier and trickier. As we get into a little bit of a slow-down session, it's gonna help Plina just a little bit, but these accuracies are just neck and neck. And as we kind of continue on, I lead just extending a little bit from that miss, but if Homu drops a little bit more on these sessions, we might see it lower just a little bit. But this definitely isn't the time where Plina wants any of those misses, just because that lead is so big already. And especially because as we kind of continue through these next picks, that score gap needed to win is just going to keep lowering and lowering by 50k by each time. Even if, like, the loss is just a little bit, I mean, you need all those extra points that you can get. But here we go, going back into more of these dumps, just being more apparent. These are the sessions that Homu's probably able to capitalize on just a little bit more. Especially just because a lot of these elements aren't as prevalent either. A lot of just kind of transitioning in and out of them, which obviously they can get some 200s from them, but most of these bad adjustments are just going to come from a lot of this transitioning into the dump sections. Continuing on with this section, there's just not really much that can be done, especially as we're just closing this off. Final burst just coming into play. Elements become ever so slightly apparent, but there's just not enough time for anything to really swing that lead over. But thankfully it is still Plina's pick. They could go for Hybrid 3 potentially. I think Hybrid 3 would honestly be their best choice. I mean, they would have gotten a little bit of a score lead on this one if they didn't miss. It's just definitely very worrying, given that it is Plina's final pick. Yeah, Hybrid 3. I think this is probably the best choice they could have gotten one. Especially just given that this one's a lot more element censored. And it's definitely a very different type of skill set from a lot of these other picks. I mean, it is a lot more speedier, which you might think in favor would help Homu a little bit more. But given the fact that it is an Ellen speed pick, I'm not really completely sure, honestly. I mean, I definitely think it helps Plina just because of the Ellen aspect, and especially because the Ellens are a lot more prevalent compared to the Rice, but I think the fact that this is a bit of a speedier pick helps Homu just a little bit. It's just a lot of kind of different advantages that both of these players get on a pick like this one, and we'll really have to see which player has that bigger advantage at the end of this. I mean, we start off with these fairly simple sections, but as we get on, these elements are going to become just a lot more trickier to hold good accuracy on, which definitely can hurt Homie just a little bit. But the fact that this is faster might actually help Homie just a little bit. They do seem to have a little bit better accuracy when it comes to a little bit of these faster picks, such as this one. But it is only the beginning, so maybe not always everyone's done. Have to see. You start to see a little bit of these kind of coordination sections. It's more of these like one-handed element trolls, which can be a little bit hard on the side of coordination, but definitely not too bad. But we are starting to transition into this next part, and potentially this is where we might see Homu lose a little bit of that accuracy. We start to see Plina gain just a little bit more, but 200 is just happening every now and then, definitely not helping them, especially when they're going to need a 15k lead. Not to mention that Homu still has one pick left, so even if they're able to manage to get that 15k lead, it just might not be enough. Here we go, Control not really messing either of these players up. Both just staying relatively close in terms of the accuracy that they've been at. And as we continue, I mean, if Plina wants to see a chance at potentially making a comeback within the tiebreaker, they're gonna have to hope that Homie starts to miss just a lot more. And as I'm saying that, we do see one coming through this kind of ending section. It's definitely not going to be enough, especially just given that Plina's dropping a little bit of that accuracy, those like kind of speed bursts, definitely hurting just a little bit, especially with the amount of control needed to hold good accuracy on this one. And given that it's a bit of a faster pick, it just makes maintaining a really good accuracy just a little bit difficult, because it might be easier to hold onto that near 99.7 range to that near 990 range, but if you want to keep increasing that accuracy, it just starts to become a lot more difficult. And even despite Plina holding that score, Homie has a little bit of that accuracy advantage, but they're only going to be able to get around 2k score difference, which might be very, very risky to come out of. I mean, really good scores from both these players. It's just really difficult to be able to come back from this one at least, but there's still Rise 5 left. I guess maybe we could see Homie mess up, but I don't really know. Especially on a pick like this, which I think helps Homie just a little bit more, given that it's dump and it focuses a lot with those streams. I mean, we see how this pick usually goes, especially when we get to the ending of this. It starts to get a little bit more difficult, and it starts to trip some players up as well. But here we go, went into our final regular pick, and potentially our final pick as well, if Homie is able to just keep that lead. But, yeah, I'm very worried for Plina though, especially given that this pick I feel like favors Homie so much more. But we'll kind of have to see. A lot of these transitions can be a little bit tricky, and maintaining good accuracy is definitely going to be a challenge on the side of both players. And we kind of see what I was kind of worried about when put into play. And Plina definitely struggling a little bit on maintaining good accuracy, but Homie is just easily running away with that 0.9, which is honestly so crazy, especially with a pick like this one. And I guess maybe not how late into this stage we are, but still, a pick like this one's just still difficult overall. As we're continuing, it does look very, very scary for Plina. I mean, especially just because we haven't really seen Homie miss on any of these Rice picks at all. I think their only miss just coming from that last pick. As we are continuing to do this, we are slowly approaching the more adventure section. And kind of missing on this break part is honestly very, very interesting. I wonder if it's just like nerves or if it might have been a bit of a keyboard issue. Oh, that is the miss that Flyna needed, but just coming too late. Oh, that is so unfortunate for Flyna, especially just given that this might have been an area where they could have maybe gotten just a little bit of score. I don't think it would have been enough, especially just given that extra miss. But both players are going to be missing on a pick like this one. A density build-up definitely affecting both of them. Just not affecting Flyna as much. But unfortunately, Flyna will be dropping down into the loser's bracket. And Homu will be going into the next round for quarterfinals in the winner's bracket, so all is not lost. But definitely a bit unfortunate for Flyna. But at least they still have losers to work their way up. But it's definitely going to be an uphill battle, just given how scary the loser's bracket is starting to become. But congratulations to Homu, and good fight from Flyna. But that will conclude this match. I've been your streamer and commentators know, and I will be seeing you next time.